March 17, 2011. A Thursday afternoon. An employee at RSA Security opens what appears to be a recruitment email. Subject line, 2011 recruitment plan. Attached is an Excel spreadsheet. The employee opens it. Nothing happens. Or so it seems. The spreadsheet appears corrupted. Blank. The employee closes it and moves on with their day. And in that moment, with that single click, the entire global infrastructure of two-factor authentication was compromised. The keys to millions of secure systems, defense contractors, banks, government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, all suddenly vulnerable. RSA Security is the company that makes SecurID tokens, those little devices that generate 6-digit codes for secure login. If you have ever worked somewhere that required two-factor authentication, you have probably used one. 40 million of these tokens were deployed worldwide. They protected some of the most sensitive systems on Earth. Military networks, nuclear facilities, intelligence agencies, and on March 17, 2011, someone stole the master keys. The breach was not discovered immediately. The attackers moved carefully, silently. They spent weeks inside RSA's network, mapping systems, exfiltrating data, covering their tracks. When RSA finally detected the intrusion on March 17th, the damage was done. The attackers had what they came for. RSA issued a carefully worded security advisory on the same day. They admitted to a breach. They claimed no customer data was stolen. They said the incident was extremely sophisticated. They used phrases like advanced persistent threat and nation-state level resources. What they did not say is what was actually taken. They could not. Because if they admitted the full scope, it would cause panic. Companies worldwide would have to replace millions of tokens. Security systems would collapse. The cost would be in the billions. So RSA stayed quiet. They worked with affected customers privately. They issued replacement tokens to some organizations. They implemented additional security measures. And they hoped the stolen information would never be used. 2 months later, Lockheed Martin, one of the largest defense contractors in the United States, detected an intrusion. Attackers were using cloned SecurID tokens to access their systems. The codes were perfect, indistinguishable from legitimate tokens. The attackers had used the RSA breach to compromise one of America's most critical defense contractors. This is where the story gets dark. Because the RSA breach was not just one incident. It was the first visible stage of what would become the blueprint for modern cyber warfare. A new kind of attack. Patient, sophisticated, targeted. Attacks that do not announce themselves with ransomware messages or defaced websites. Attacks that hide, that persist, that achieve strategic objectives years after the initial breach. This is the story of how modern cybersecurity failed. How a single phishing email compromised the foundation of global digital security. How the incident was covered up, downplayed, and ultimately forgotten by everyone except the people who understand how close we came to complete infrastructure collapse. Welcome to Dark Tech Stories, where we tell you what really happened behind the headlines. The breaches that did not want you to understand. The vulnerabilities they hoped you would forget. The moment everything changed. To understand why the RSA breach mattered, you need to understand what RSA Security actually is and why their compromise was so catastrophic. RSA Security, a division of EMC Corporation, later acquired by Dell, is not a typical tech company. They do not make consumer products. They do not have a public brand presence. Most people have never heard of them. But if you work in corporate security, defense, finance, or government, RSA is everywhere. Their primary product is the SecurID token. A small device about the size of a key fob with an LCD screen that displays a 6-digit number. This number changes every 60 seconds. When you log into a secure system, you enter your password plus the current 6-digit code from your token. This is two-factor authentication. Something you know your password plus something you have the token. The security of this system depends on a secret seed value programmed into each token. The token and the authentication server both know this seed. They use it with the current time to generate the 6-digit code. Because the seed is secret and unique to each token, an attacker cannot generate valid codes without access to the seed database unless they steal the seed database, which is exactly what happened on March 17, 2011. The attack was a masterclass in advanced persistent threat methodology. It began with reconnaissance. The attackers, believed to be a Chinese state-sponsored group later identified as Comment Crew or APT-1, spent months researching RSA. They identified employees, studied organizational structure, found email addresses, built profiles. Then they crafted a spear phishing campaign. Not mass spam. Targeted emails sent to specific employees. The emails appeared to come from trusted sources. They referenced real internal information. They were designed to bypass suspicion. The critical email was sent to two small groups of employees. Low-level workers, not executives or security staff, people less likely to be suspicious of recruitment-related messages. The email contained an Excel attachment. The file name, 2011 Recruitment Plan.xls. The attachment exploited a zero-day vulnerability in Adobe Flash embedded in the Excel file. Zero-day means the vulnerability was unknown to Adobe and Microsoft. No patch existed. No antivirus could detect it. When the file was opened, malicious code executed silently. A backdoor was installed. The attackers were inside RSA's network. What followed is called lateral movement. The attackers did not immediately go after their target. They explored. They compromised additional systems. They escalated privileges. They installed multiple backdoors for redundancy. They studied the network architecture. They identified where the valuable data was stored. This phase took weeks. The attackers were in no hurry. Persistence is the key characteristic of APT attacks. They operate on strategic timelines, not tactical ones. They can afford to wait because they are state-sponsored, well-resourced, and focused on long-term intelligence gathering. Eventually, they reach their target. The database containing the SecurID seed values, or more precisely, information that could be used to compromise the SecurID system. RSA has never publicly disclosed exactly what was taken, but the subsequent Lockheed Martin attack proved the stolen information was sufficient to clone tokens. When RSA detected the breach, they faced an impossible decision. Admit the full scope and trigger a global security crisis, or minimize the disclosure and try to manage the damage privately. They chose the latter. The public disclosure was vague. The private response was extensive. They worked with customers to implement additional authentication factors. They issued replacement tokens to high-value targets. They enhanced monitoring. But they never publicly admitted that the SecurID system was fundamentally compromised. Subscribe if you want to understand the security breaches that actually changed how the world works, not just the ones that made headlines. Because what happened next reveals how deep this rabbit hole goes. The RSA breach did not end with RSA. It was stage one of a multi-phase operation. The real target was never RSA. They were the key that unlocked the door. The real targets were the organizations that trusted RSA's authentication system, defense contractors, intelligence agencies, critical infrastructure. Lockheed Martin was the first confirmed victim. In late May 2011, approximately 2 months after the RSA breach, Lockheed detected sophisticated attempts to access their systems using cloned SecurID tokens. The attackers had used information from the RSA breach to generate valid authentication codes. They were not guessing. They were not brute forcing. They had legitimate-looking credentials. Lockheed's security team detected the intrusion early. They shut down remote access. They isolated compromised systems. They worked with RSA to implement emergency security measures. They claimed the attackers did not successfully exfiltrate sensitive data. Whether this is entirely true is classified. What is certain is that the attackers got farther than they should have been able to. But Lockheed was not the only target. Based on public reporting and leaked intelligence documents, at least dozens of other organizations were targeted using the same compromised SecurID information. Most were defense contractors. Northrop Grumman, L3 Communications, possibly hundreds of smaller contractors in the defense supply chain. Each attack followed the same pattern. Valid credentials, sophisticated lateral movement, focus on intellectual property and classified information. This was not crime. This was espionage. The attackers were not after credit card numbers or ransom payments. They were after defense technology, aircraft designs, weapons systems, satellite technology, intelligence on military capabilities. The kind of information that determines strategic balance between nations. The full scope was never publicly disclosed. national security concerns, contractor embarrassment, classification of affected programs. We know what was admitted. We can infer much more from circumstantial evidence, analysis by security firms, comments by government officials, patterns in subsequent Chinese military development that suggest access to American defense technology. The RSA breach fundamentally changed cybersecurity in several ways. First, it demonstrated that even security companies are vulnerable. RSA's entire business was security. They employed experts. They had sophisticated defenses. They understood the threat, and they were still compromised by a well-crafted phishing email. If RSA could be breached, anyone could, second, expose the fragility of widely deployed security infrastructure. Millions of tokens, thousands of organizations, all depending on the same company maintaining the same secrets. When that single point of failure failed, the entire system collapsed. This forced a rethinking of authentication architecture. Multiple factors, multiple vendors, zero trust models. Third, it revealed the sophistication of state-sponsored cyber operations. This was not a lone hacker or even a criminal group. This was a coordinated operation with clear strategic objectives, executed with patience and precision. It required technical expertise, operational security, and deep understanding of target networks. It represented a new category of threat that traditional cybersecurity was not designed to handle. Fourth, it demonstrated the challenge of public disclosure. RSA's vague initial statement left customers uncertain about their risk. The lack of technical details made it difficult for security teams to implement appropriate countermeasures. But full disclosure might have caused panic and given attackers additional information. There is no good answer to this dilemma, and we still struggle with it today. If this investigation is revealing how vulnerable our critical infrastructure really is, leave a like. Because the implications go far beyond one breach in 2011. Let us talk about what was never publicly confirmed but what security professionals understand happened. The technical details RSA could not admit. The scope of compromise that would have been too catastrophic to acknowledge. When RSA said information relating to SecurID was stolen, what did that mean? They never specified. But based on the subsequent attacks and the capabilities demonstrated by the attackers, we can infer several possibilities. Possibility 1. The seed records themselves. Each SecurID token has a unique seed value. This seed is stored in the token and in RSA's central database. If the attackers stole this database, they could generate valid codes for any token at any time. This would be total compromise. Every SecurID token in the world would be compromised. But this seems unlikely to be the full story, because RSA did not immediately revoke all tokens. They issued targeted replacements to specific high-value customers. Possibility 2. The algorithm and partial seed information. Perhaps the attackers did not get every individual token seed, but they got enough information about how the system works to generate valid codes with some additional information. For example, if they could combine stolen seed data with information gathered from targeted organizations, they could clone specific tokens. This matches what was observed at Lockheed and other contractors. Possibility 3. The master manufacturing records. Information about when tokens were produced, serial number ranges, and relationships between tokens and organizational deployments. This metadata, combined with other intelligence, could allow attackers to prioritize targets and focus cloning efforts on the most valuable tokens. The truth is probably some combination. What matters is that the attackers gained sufficient information to defeat two-factor authentication at dozens of organizations. This capability persisted for months or possibly years after the initial breach. Organizations that did not receive replacement tokens remained vulnerable. Some may still be vulnerable today if they continue using legacy SecurID tokens, but here is what really should concern you. The RSA breach was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader campaign. Operation Aurora, the attack on Google and dozens of other tech companies, happened in late 2009. RSA breach in March 2011. Subsequent defense contractor compromises throughout 2011 and 2012. The pattern suggests a coordinated, multi-year effort to compromise American technology companies and defense infrastructure. Security researchers have documented extensive connections. The same malware families. Similar infrastructure. Overlapping command and control servers. Common targeting patterns. This was not random. It was systematic. A deliberate campaign to penetrate critical sectors of the American economy and defense industrial base. The attackers, broadly attributed to Chinese state-sponsored groups but never officially confirmed by the U.S. government in relation to RSA specifically, demonstrated patience and sophistication unusual even for nation-state actors. They did not rush. They did not make obvious mistakes. They adapted when defenders improved. They maintained operational security. They achieved strategic objectives over years, not days. This is what modern cyber warfare looks like. Not a sudden attack that cripples infrastructure. Instead, slow, quiet penetration of networks, theft of intellectual property and classified information, positioning for future operations, building maps of enemy networks for use in a potential conflict, undermining economic competitiveness through technology theft. The RSA breach fit perfectly into this strategy. Compromise the authentication system. Gain access to defense contractors. Steal weapons designs. The information does not just provide immediate intelligence value. It accelerates China's military development by decades. Every stolen design is a decade of research they do not have to conduct. Every compromised system is a vulnerability they can exploit in future conflict. And the response? Inadequate. RSA issued security advisories, offered replacement tokens to some customers, enhanced their security. But the fundamental problem remains. Centralized authentication systems create single points of failure. When they fail, the consequences cascade across entire sectors. Companies learn the wrong lessons. They focused on securing their perimeters. Better firewalls. Better intrusion detection. More monitoring. But the attackers were already inside. The lesson should have been, assume breach. Design systems that function even when trust is broken. Implement zero-trust architecture. Verify everything. Trust nothing. Most organizations did not do this. It was too expensive, too disruptive, too complicated. So they patched the obvious holes and hoped for the best. And the attackers? They adapted. They found new vulnerabilities. They improved their techniques. The breach of RSA was a learning experience for them too. They learned what works, what gets detected, how to be more careful next time. Let us connect this to the present. Why does a breach from 2011 matter in 2025? Because nothing fundamental has changed. The vulnerabilities that allowed the RSA breach still exist. The tactics that worked then still work now. And the consequences of that breach are still unfolding. First, consider the long-term impact on compromised organizations. If your network was penetrated in 2011, and the attackers installed persistent backdoors, how confident are you that those backdoors are gone? Complete remediation requires rebuilding systems from scratch. Most organizations did not do this. They ran scans. They removed known malware. They changed passwords. But sophisticated attackers install multiple redundant backdoors. They hide in firmware. They compromise supply chains. Complete removal is nearly impossible without complete rebuild. This means organizations compromised in 2011 may still be compromised today. The attackers may have maintained low-level access for 14 years. Think about what that means. 14 years of stolen emails, stolen documents, stolen intellectual property, observing security improvements, and adapting. Positioning for future operations. Second, the stolen intellectual property has long-term value. Weapons systems take decades to develop. If China stole F-35 designs in 2011, they can incorporate that technology into aircraft being developed now. Every stolen design accelerates their military development. This affects strategic balance not just today, but for decades to come. Third, the breach demonstrated that supply chain attacks work. RSA was not the ultimate target. They were the supply chain. Attack the vendor. Compromise the product. Use that to reach the real targets. This playbook has been repeated many times since. Most famously in the SolarWinds breach of 2020, where attackers compromised software used by thousands of organizations, but the pattern was established earlier. RSA was one of the first major supply chain attacks to be publicly disclosed. Fourth, the incident revealed the impossibility of meaningful disclosure. RSA's vague statements left customers uncertain. Government classification prevented full discussion of national security implications. Competitive pressures limited what contractors would admit. The result is that even today, we do not know the full scope. How many organizations were compromised? What information was stolen? What ongoing access do attackers maintain? This information vacuum creates problems. Organizations cannot properly assess their risk without knowing the threat. Security researchers cannot develop effective defenses without understanding attack techniques. Policymakers cannot regulate effectively without accurate damage assessments. Secrecy, intended to prevent panic, creates ignorance that enables future attacks. Fifth, the breach showed that even security companies are targets. You would think attacking a security company would be difficult. They have experts. They have defenses. They understand threats. But they also have valuable access. Compromise a security company, and you compromise their customers. RSA is not the only example. Kaspersky, FIRA. Multiple security vendors have been breached. Each time, the attackers gain access to security tools, threat intelligence, and customer information. Sixth, the incident proved that sophisticated social engineering defeats technical defenses. The RSA breach began with a phishing email, not a brilliant zero-day exploit against hardened infrastructure. An Excel file sent to low-level employees. Human vulnerability, not technical vulnerability. We spend billions on firewalls and intrusion detection. We spend far less on training employees to recognize sophisticated phishing. And attackers know this. They focus effort where defenses are weakest. Finally, the breach revealed that attribution is difficult and consequences are limited. We are reasonably confident the attack was Chinese state-sponsored. But official attribution was never made. No sanctions were imposed specifically for the RSA breach. No one was arrested. No diplomatic consequences. The attackers succeeded and faced no meaningful response. This creates incentives. If sophisticated attacks have high payoff and low risk, why would they stop? So here we are in 2025. The RSA breach is ancient history by tech standards. Most security professionals today were not working in the field when it happened. It is rarely discussed in breach lists alongside more recent incidents, but its legacy is everywhere. In the zero-trust architectures we are slowly adopting. In the supply chain security concerns that dominate policy discussions. In the assumption that nation-state attackers are inside our networks. In the understanding that authentication systems are targets, not just protections. The RSA breach of 2011 should have been a watershed moment. It should have fundamentally changed how we approach cybersecurity. In some ways it did. But in many ways, we learned the wrong lessons or did not learn them thoroughly enough. Here's what we should have learned. Centralized systems are vulnerable. Single points of failure will eventually fail. Authentication should be multi-layered, using diverse systems from multiple vendors. No one company should be so critical that their compromise cascades across entire sectors. We should have learned that sophisticated attackers will defeat perimeter defenses. The focus should be on resilience and detection, not prevention. Assume breach. Design systems that contain damage. Implement zero-trust principles where every action is verified regardless of network position. Should have learned that supply chains are vulnerable. Every vendor is a potential vector. Every software update is a potential compromise point. Security must include vendor assessment, code review, and network segmentation to limit supply chain attack impact. Should have learned that disclosure is necessary for defense. Vague statements leave customers unable to assess risk or implement proper countermeasures. Security through obscurity does not work. Transparency, even when embarrassing or costly, enables better collective defense. We should have learned that human factors matter as much as technical factors. The most sophisticated defenses fail when an employee opens a malicious attachment. Training, awareness, and culture are as important as firewalls and encryption. We should have learned that nation-state attacks require nation-state responses. Individual companies cannot defend against well-resourced, patient, strategic adversaries. Defense requires coordination, information sharing, government involvement, clear attribution, meaningful consequences for attackers. Some of these lessons have been partially learned. Zero-trust architecture is slowly being adopted. Supply chain security is now a policy priority. Information sharing has improved, but progress is slow, incomplete, and uneven. Many organizations still operate with perimeter-based security. Many still use single-factor authentication or poorly implemented multi-factor. Many still lack basic security hygiene, and the attacks continue. Every year brings new breaches, more sophisticated, more damaging, more difficult to detect. The attackers learn faster than the defenders. They adapt to every improvement. They find new vulnerabilities faster than we can patch old ones. The RSA breach proved that determined attackers with sufficient resources can compromise almost anything. That should be assumed, not debated. The question is not if your critical systems will be breached, but when and how much damage the breach will cause before detection and containment. This is not defeatism. It is realism. Security is not binary. It is not secure versus insecure. It is a spectrum of risk, a balance of cost and protection, a constant adaptation to evolving threats. The RSA breach showed us that perfect security is impossible. The question is whether we build systems that can fail gracefully or catastrophically. As of 2025, too many systems would fail catastrophically. Critical infrastructure protected by legacy security. Defense networks assuming perimeter security is sufficient. Financial systems trusting authentication methods that have been compromised. Supply chains with inadequate vetting. All vulnerable to the same tactics that worked in 2011. Share this if you think more people should understand how fragile our security infrastructure really is. Because the next major breach will not announce itself with ransomware messages or press releases. It will be quiet, persistent, strategic, and we might not discover it until years after the damage is done. Welcome to Dark Tech Stories, where we reveal what happened in the shadows of technology. The breaches that did not want you to understand. The vulnerabilities that should keep you awake at night. The moment when everything changed and almost no one noticed. The RSA breach of 2011 compromised the authentication system protecting millions of secure systems worldwide. It enabled espionage against defense contractors. It stole classified information and intellectual property. It demonstrated the power of patient, sophisticated, state-sponsored cyber operations, and you probably never heard about it. Because that is how the most dangerous breaches work. They do not announce themselves. They do not make headlines. They quietly change the world while everyone looks elsewhere. 14 years later, the systems we compromised then may still be compromised. The information stolen then is still being exploited. And the tactics proven effective then are still being used today. The breach changed everything. But we never fully understood what changed. And that might be the most dangerous part of all.